The Israeli military will control about 53% of Gaza, following the signing of the final draft of the Gaza peace plan Phase 1 deal in Egypt by all parties. According to media reports, she further stated that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump held an emotional call, praising each other for the historic achievement. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced that Turkey will join a task force to monitor the implementation of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas signed in Egypt and promised to support Gaza's reconstruction, according to media reports. Meanwhile, Israeli government has announced that prominent Palestinian prisoner Marwan Barghouti will not be included in the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukrainian strikes may have cut Russian gasoline supplies by up to 1/5. He further added that Russian forces carried out 1,550 strikes on energy targets in Ukraine over the past month, while the US and Russia has no shared perspective on the war, according to him. The U.S. government shutdown enters its second week, while court hearings in Illinois and California will review President Donald Trump's National Guard deployments to Chicago and Portland, as governors and a coalition of 24 states challenge defederalization. French President Emmanuel Macron is seeking his sixth prime minister within the next 36 hours now. This follows after outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu resigned on Monday amid France's worst political crisis in modern history. Pope Leo has criticized trickle-down economic policies and urges Catholics to support immigrants in his first major document. He further warned that the global market system leaves too many in poverty and signals continuity with late Pope Francis, who began the document before his death in April. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has praised the legacy of the Workers' Party as today marks its 80th anniversary, as delegations arrived from China, Russia, and Vietnam to Pyongyang for celebrations. Foreign dignitaries, including Chinese Premier Li Qiang, Russia's Dmitry Medvedev, and Vietnam's To Lam have joined the events. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi has urged Rwandan leader Paul Kagame to make peace and hold support for insurgents in eastern DRC during a Brussels Global Gateway Forum. Tshisekedi called on Kagame to order the M23 troops to stop escalation that has already caused numerous deaths. Now we start from the Middle East. Israeli government spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian has said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump held an emotional phone call today. The conversation followed the announcement of a Gaza deal between Israel and Hamas. She has said that the plan was signed earlier this morning, laying out the steps for the release of hostages and the initial withdrawal of troops. The spokeswoman has added that a ceasefire is expected to take effect within 24 hours of today's Israeli cabinet meeting. Let's in fact listen into what the Israeli government spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian had said.
In a phone call earlier this morning, Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Trump for his global leadership efforts to make this all possible. It was a very emotional and a warm conversation as both leaders congratulated each other on this historic achievement. Phase 1 was signed this morning in Egypt by all parties to release all of the hostages. And the IDF will then redeploy to that yellow line we mentioned, which will lead to the military controlling and holding about 53% of the Gaza Strip. Now, Phase 1 stands very clear. All of our hostages, the living and deceased, will be released 72 hours later, which will bring us to Monday. Has Israel agreed or refused to release Palestinian prisoner Marwan Barghouti? I can tell you at this point in time that he will not be part of this release.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Sol Sadka. She's a security analyst and author, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Sol, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, with the first phase of Gaza ceasefire agreement finalized, how do you assess the potential for this agreement to hold?
I very much anticipate the first phase to hold. There are too many people who put too much political capital onto this deal holding, at least for the first stage, which means the Israelis will release 2,000 political prisoners. Sorry, 2,000 essentially terrorists with blood on their hands, what the Palestinians often refer to as political prisoners, but are absolutely not. These are all people that have been convicted of heinous crimes. In return for Israel releasing those people, mostly to be sent to exile elsewhere in the region. In return for that, the final hostages will be released, and the bodies of 28 people who were killed and taken to captivity will also be released. I very, very much anticipate that that will come to fruition at this point.
As you've mentioned about the POWs, the decision to exclude this particular individual, Marwan Barghouti, from the upcoming prisoner release, how do you think this will impact Palestinian internal politics? And who do you think he is, if you can tell us, who is this guy?
He was a very senior leader within the Palestinian leadership in the early part of this century. He was instrumental in the leadership of the Second Intifada, and he is a figure of great hate in Israel. There are parts of Palestinian society, small parts, but parts nevertheless, who would like to see him become a national leader, and Israel has been insistent on allowing that to happen on account of the tremendous destruction and death that he wrought on Israeli citizens over the years. So I'm not surprised to see him not on the list of people being released. I would have felt that would be a red line for Israel, and it looks like that red line has held.
And now looking at a broader picture here, other international countries were involved in this, particularly Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. How do you think, what were the roles of these countries, and what will be the roles moving forward?
As regards, I think the critical factor here, I believe, from what I'm reading, is Qatar, not Turkey or Egypt. Egypt and Turkey are dependent and have been for a long time on American arms. Qatar, on the other hand, is somewhat different. They've been playing a double game. They have been presenting themselves for decades at this point as an intermediary between the West and jihadis, while at the same time funding every jihadi group in the world with huge largesse derived from its oil wealth. And what seems to have happened about a month ago is that the American negotiators and Trump himself realized that what Israelis had been telling them for a while, and had been telling even the Biden administration, that bringing Hamas to heel, the critical factor of bringing Hamas to heel was first bringing Qatar. If you could force Qatar to do what the Americans were telling them, which should be easy because Qatar is essentially dependent for their security on America, so America had plenty of leverage. Hamas could also be brought to the negotiating table and forced into a capitulation, which is what happened. On the 5th of September, the tone of the Americans towards Qatar shifted publicly. There were negative statements about Qatar from the Trump administration, particularly Adam Boehler and even Rubio. They explained that they pretty much had enough of Qatar's double dealing. And 4 days after that, there was an Israeli kinetic strike on Qatar's capital, Doha, a few kilometers, maybe a few tens of kilometers from the largest American base in the Middle East. Now, despite American denials, nobody in Israel, Qatar, or anywhere in the Middle East had any doubt that that was with tacit American approval. And that was all part of a game to force Qatar to the table. By bringing Qatar to the table, they were able to get Hamas to agree to demands they were never previously willing to agree to.
Yes.
They were. So Qatar is going to hand over the hostages, while Israel is going to retain control over most of the Gaza Strip, including a large buffer zone. And the effect of that will be that even though Hamas will still exist and will still run the daily lives of most of Gaza's 2 million population, who are mostly now living in tents, they will no longer pose a threat to Israel. They won't have any leverage over Israel, and they won't be able to attack Israeli civilians for the foreseeable.
And Sol, thank you for that. That was really insightful. Last but not least, do you think that President Donald Trump will be getting a peace prize? Some of our guests have said yes, some of our guests have said no. It should be Qatar instead who should be endorsed for this.
Qatar absolutely should not be entitled to any kind of peace prize. There is no nation in the Middle East who is more despised by all the neighbors. If you recall, only a few years ago, all Qatar's neighbors in the Arabian Peninsula essentially boycotted them and set up a blockade against them. They have aggravated everybody, and they funded Hamas, and they funded every other jihadi organization known to man. Qatar does not deserve any peace. Trump, on the other hand, does. Because Trump did the right thing. Trump recognized that bringing an end to the war meant uniting alongside their ally Israel, that the West and all the Arab nations, and Turkey essentially, stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel and told Hamas, the time has come, it's over, you've lost, surrender. And that's in the end what happened. Until that point, Israel's ostensible allies, and right up until now, even European nations, have tried to play the other side, and they've tried to weaken and divide Israel to try and bring Israel towards some kind of capitulation. In the end, it worked out, and it's very good that it worked out this way. Otherwise, the entire West would be in danger of future attacks from jihadis over the next decades and the next century. It worked out very well, and I definitely agree that Trump is entitled to the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it's extremely unlikely that he will win it, knowing what I know about the people that make that decision. The prize that he was not given, and it was instead given to someone else, perhaps even UNRWA. So let's see what happens, but completely, no question, of all the American presidents in recent times, Trump has done more to bring peace to the Middle East than anyone before him.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Sol, for joining us today and sharing that insight.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Now we move on. UN Secretary-General António Guterres has urged the international community to never forget the unbearable human cost of the conflict in Gaza. He has called for safe and sustained access for humanitarian workers, removal of red tape, and the rebuilding of shattered infrastructure. Guterres has stated that the UN and its partners are ready to provide essential assistance, including food, water, medical care, and shelter. He has also called for the immediate release of all hostages and the establishment of a permanent ceasefire. Guterres has praised the US, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey for their role in securing a desperately needed breakthrough in the negotiations. Let's listen into what the UN Secretary-General António Guterres has said.
Agreement to secure a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza, based on the proposal put forward by President Donald J. Trump. And I commend the diplomatic efforts of the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey in brokering the desperately needed breakthrough. We have all waited far too long for this moment. Now we must make it truly count. I urge all parties to fully abide by the terms of the agreement and to fully embrace the opportunities it presents. All hostages must be released in a dignified manner. A permanent ceasefire must be secured. The bloodshed must stop once and for all.
Now we move on to North America. Courts in Illinois and Oregon will be deciding whether to block U.S. President Donald Trump's National Guard deployments in these states. Moreover, a federal judge in Illinois will decide whether to hold the National Guard's deployment to Chicago, where troops have begun patrolling an immigration facility focused by protests. Additionally, an appeals court in California will review a lower court order blocking the deployment to Portland, Oregon. Earlier today, National Guard troops have been seen inside a Chicago area immigration facility carrying sidearms but without riot gear. Now, this facility has been a site of ongoing protests since last month, with ICE officers using crowd control measures. Meanwhile, a coalition of 24 states has filed a brief supporting Oregon and California's lawsuit, arguing the deployment violates the Constitution and undermines state authority. In response, the Trump administration has said that the troops are needed to protect federal officers, citing threats from protesters, but Democratic governors have criticized the president, claiming he is manufacturing a crisis for political reasons. Overall, President Trump faces 4 lawsuits over troop deployments in Portland, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Matthew Vadum. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now,
good to see you.
Thank you. What more can you tell us about this news that's unfolding, and how do you see this shaping the balance of power between state governments and the federal government?
Well, the various states and cities affected by Donald Trump federalizing the state National Guard troops are fighting his decision. And a little over an hour from now in San Francisco, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit will hear Portland, Oregon's challenge to President Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon. The reason that President Trump gave for sending the troops to Portland, Oregon, was that the local authorities are not doing enough to protect ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement facilities in Portland. And I think he's correct. They are resisting, and they're not doing very much to protect federal property in Portland. And so he thought that it was necessary to take National Guard troops and issue an order converting them to federal duty. And so they are, the goal is to use the state National Guard troops to restore order in those places insofar as the local police and local authorities are not doing enough to protect federal immigration facilities in that city. And he's done it in a number of other cities as well. And there's even talk that he might invoke the Insurrection Act soon, which would give him greater power to use, I think, regular United States troops to maintain order. But I think that's only a rumor right now. I don't think any plans have been set in motion to actually do that.
Matthew, thank you for sharing that. And now a coalition of 24 states has filed a brief supporting their lawsuits against the National Guard deployments. So how significant is this multi-state coalition in influencing the outcome of lawsuits? Does it have any influence, and what does it signal about the broader climate regarding federal-state relations?
I think that the courts take seriously when states file briefs in support of each other's positions in federal court, and the court will weigh the issue and take their position into account. It doesn't mean the court will necessarily be swayed by them. However, clearly federal and relations between the federal government and blue states, many of which are illegal alien sanctuary states that resist federal immigration enforcement efforts, these are the states that are resisting and are allowing Antifa and other subversive radical groups to attack federal facilities. So, it's not surprising that these states are opposed to President Trump trying to enforce immigration law after President Biden ignored it for 4 years and allowed an estimated 10 to 15 million illegal aliens to enter the United States. when you have to clean up the mess that the last guy left, it isn't pretty. And that's what you're seeing right now with these mass immigration raids and so on.
Yeah.
Would have been easier just to keep the illegal aliens out of the country, but that's not what happens. So this is what President Trump feels he has to do to restore law and order in the United States, and he also thinks that the presence of so many illegal aliens is bad for society, that it drives up social welfare costs, and it drives American workers' wages down. And there's a lot of evidence supporting his argument in that respect.
With that, I would like to thank Matthew Vadam for joining us all the way from Washington, D.C., and sharing that insight as an American journalist and author. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has confirmed that following a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump, the White House has appointed Marco Rubio to continue diplomatic talks with Brazil's Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira. Lula has described the call as unexpectedly warm and respectful, stating that both leaders, as senior statesmen of major Western democracies, have a responsibility to promote harmony rather than conflict. He has expressed that hope that formal discussions would now begin, and reiterated that Brazil does not seek confrontation with the United States.
Nada concreto, é que ele me telefonou e no telefonema havia uma expectativa de que ia ter muita discussão. Ele me ligou da forma mais gentil que um ser humano pode lidar com o outro. A pessoa que ele indicou, que é o secretário de Estado, Marco Rubio, ligou para o meu ministro Mauro Vieira. Talvez comece a ter conversa a partir de agora. E vamos ver se a gente consegue se acertar, porque o Brasil não quer briga com os Estados Unidos, o Brasil não quer briga.
Now we move on to our next news. At the Global Gateway Forum in Brussels, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi has made a direct appeal to Rwanda's President Paul Kagame, urging him to cease support for insurgents in the Democratic Republic of Congo and work together towards peace. Speaking after Kagame at the investment conference, Tshisekedi has called for an end to the violence caused by the M23 insurgent group, which has been supported by Rwanda, according to them. Let's listen in.
Mon discours avait prévu un plaidoyer et un appel à des sanctions contre ce pays. Vous avez deviné de qui il s'agit. Mais étant donné que j'ai vu le président du Rwanda, parce que c'est de lui qu'il s'agit, je prends à témoin l'assistance ici présente et le monde entier qui nous suit à travers les réseaux pour lancer un appel à la paix, lui tendre la main et demander à ce qu'on arrête cette escalade, que la République démocratique du Congo n'est pas belliqueuse. La République démocratique du Congo veut la paix, la véritable paix qui va entraîner la stabilité et permettre le développement de cette région qui, pour moi, est l'une des plus belles régions du monde, c'est-à-dire cette région des Grands Lacs. J'espère que cet appel sera entendu par le président Kagame et je lui dis ma disponibilité à discuter de cette situation.
While Kagame has not addressed the ongoing conflict directly in his speech, but he has acknowledged the positive energy for peace earlier expressed by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. The eastern DRC, which is rich in natural resources but plagued by armed groups, has been the site of intense violence for over 3 decades. Despite a ceasefire agreement in July and a separate peace deal between the DRC and Rwanda, violence persists, complicating efforts for stability in the region. Now we move on. Pope Leo has released his first major document as leader of the Catholic Church, which is an apostolic exhortation calling for greater support for migrants and the world's poor. The 104-page text titled Dilexite was initially drafted by the late Pope Francis before his death in April and completed by Pope Leo, which is the first American person to hold the papacy. Now, the concerned document centers on economic inequality and social justice, urging changes to global market structures that have left millions in poverty. It has also criticized border walls and immigration restrictions, echoing earlier Vatican concerns about U.S. policies under U.S. President Donald Trump. Additionally, Pope Leo's writing stresses that the Church should stand with migrants and the marginalized while addressing the root causes of inequality. Meanwhile, Vatican officials have said that while the work had already begun under late Pope Francis, it fully reflects Pope Leo's own priorities, signaling continuity in the Church's stance on poverty, migration, and ethical economic reform. Now we move on to Asia. In Japan, influenza cases have spiked, prompting local authorities to declare a nationwide epidemic. Medical experts warn the virus is evolving rapidly, spreading faster than ever. Hospital wards are overwhelmed and schools across the country have been forced to shut down. This early outbreak, 5 weeks ahead of schedule, signals unprecedented viral adoption. Experts believe global mobility and increase in tourism are contributing to the virus's quick spread. On October 3rd, Japan's Ministry of Health reported over 4,000 cases, a 957-case jump from the previous week. The flu season's early start is a concern, with experts anticipating similar trends globally. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates